Hey everyone, this is Michael Gibbons with Trend Micro, cloud solutions architect on the Cloud One team. So I've been working specifically in Azure, AWS, and GCP and helping deploy Trend Micro security to those public clouds for about 3 years now. What we're going to talk about today is automated, flexible, all-in-one security for Microsoft Azure. This stems from Trend Micro's Cloud One. Before we do that, let's examine a couple of challenges that come from cloud security. Here we go. A couple of things when it comes to cloud security, some of the core challenges come from the cloud in and of itself, but some of them are also carried over from traditional on-premise environments, right? We're looking at new vectors for breaches. The range of cloud services offered today can indeed have a positive impact on the way organizations operate, but there is a potential dark side to that as the number of vectors for breaches definitely increases with it. Next, there is the increasing velocity of application delivery. Many organizations today are being driven to iterate fast and iterate often, and the speed at which applications are being delivered can definitely introduce security concerns in and of themselves. The next piece there, kind of piggybacking off of Shiva's point, is the acceleration of cloud adoption. This is happening at such an alarming rate, and with cloud adoption means new services being utilized. And with those new services arise a whole new knowledge base and a whole new set of security best practices to follow along with as well. Within or kind of tying into the security best practices is demanding compliance requirements. This is definitely one of those that is shared with on-premise security. Compliance regulations, without a doubt, are just here to stay. And moving to the cloud, that just means we have new ways that we have to keep them in place. Another challenge there is just the number of security tools out there in order to do a certain thing. The cloud in and of itself has many different security vectors, some of which require tooling from multiple different security vendors. With that, organizations have to keep a lot of track on top of those different tools, stay up to date, what works with what, how do we deploy it to what we're trying to secure on top of achieving the business goals within the cloud as well. Lastly, we're looking at multiple teams making multiple security decisions, right? If we are kind of taking a segmented a segmented organizational structure and moving that to the cloud, without a doubt, that's going to lead to segmented communication, security visibility, and segmented decisions if we don't have a plan in place to kind of consolidate everything. So knowing those challenges, let's just take a brief look at some of the strategic priorities for organizations moving into the cloud so we can identify where those challenges and the priorities intersect. So I've got these public cloud providers here, and regardless of where you're going, right, for a lot of organizations, the first thing that they're looking at is, if they haven't already, to migrate to the cloud. So one thing to acknowledge in this is that it's definitely a transition, not a cut over. So hybrid cloud is definitely going to be the norm. It's totally understandable. Nobody's just going to pick everything up and move it there and then just, hit the off switch. So that means, leveraging that hybrid environment. Stuff is still going to be on premise, stuff is going to be in the cloud, but we always 100% have to secure both of those. The next priority here is moving towards developing cloud native applications. And this isn't so much post-migration, because some organizations do this from the get-go, but we are kind of moving towards a new model, right? We're not just what's the word I'm looking for? We're not just re-platforming what we've had on premise into the cloud. Now we're going more towards a model that supports automation, CI/CD, and it's going to leverage all of the tools needed to accomplish that. Some of the tools and services used to address this priority are going to be those DevOps tools like GitHub, Jenkins, things like Jira and Slack, but then also, the tools and solutions native to whatever cloud you're working in, keeping it specific to Azure. On the workload side, we're looking at Azure VMs. If we're looking at cloud storage, going towards Azure Blob. If we want to leverage containers native to that, keeping it specific to Azure, we've got the Azure Kubernetes service, so on and so forth. The serverless services, mainly Azure Functions, and then the open source code repository tools there, things like GitLab, Bitbucket and GitHub. The third priority then is going to be cloud operational excellence. And this is once we have moved from getting everything up into the cloud and are now focused on assuring that everything in there is secure, compliant, and operationally efficient. In order to accomplish this, without a doubt, we're going to have some tools we might have to put in place, or we're going to have to do reviews of our posture in a sense. So the best tools that are going to help us address that posture are going to be automated platforms that can assess our GRC, as well as well-architected best practices, while simultaneously giving us insight on how to address those. So what can we do, or what can Trend do to implement security measures into those different priorities and their intersections with those challenges? So let's take a look at the cloud native applications side of things in a little bit more detail, right? With this priority comes a number of different security vectors, just as aforementioned. And I'm not going to list them all off. I'm just going to let this animation run so we can identify some of those vectors. Things like vulnerable container images, either in our registry or set up to run on our production clusters. Things like misconfigured cloud services, right? There's a whole learning curve that comes with the cloud. So are we configuring everything properly? If not, how do we assess that? Are the applications we're running in the cloud, are they susceptible to SQL injection? Can we put anything in those applications to monitor for malicious web requests or malicious application activity, and then identify how to correct that in order to go clean moving forward? So operational challenges on this side of the house are definitely a lack of visibility across cloud environment or cloud environments, plural, right? If we're multi-cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP, we've seen organizations that are going across the top three, and they're just kind of mimicking what they do in one across the others. With that rises the need for visibility. Across that comes new threat vectors, and seeing all these different areas where we have these blue boxes here, technically that might be an area for the security team to come in and pump the brakes on either the development team or the operations team, depending on what we're working on there. On the migration side of the house, if we're still kind of lifting and shifting things over, the intersections are similar, but a little bit different, right? Chances are if we're re-platforming and we haven't really dived into those cloud native services yet, we're probably just going to focus mainly on the Azure VMs side of things for our web applications, or if we're doing internal applications as well for the hosting of that. With that comes the implications of all the network topology native to Azure as well, and tying the hybrid, or tying the on-premise and the cloud environment together and applying security there. So misconfigured cloud services is definitely one that can be carried over from cloud native to cloud migration. That could potentially always be there due to the learning curve. But things like workload focused vulnerabilities may arise, like unpatched operating systems, the susceptibility to ransomware, any sort of communications between a command and control server. We want to get on those machines and apply security controls accordingly to block that off. So operational challenges on this side of the house: visibility to both the hybrid and the multi-cloud infrastructure, depending on whether we're just running, a single cloud provider with our hybrid model, or multiple different cloud providers there. We're definitely going to have to prove compliance as we move to the cloud, regardless of whether we're on-premise or in the cloud. If we've got regulations to follow, we're going to have to prove it somehow, some way. And then also, like I said, there's a learning curve here. So with replatforming, there is definitely, similar concepts. We're just kind of lifting and shifting everything there, and application concepts, networking concepts stay the same. But the way that these new services that we're learning how to use, the way that they interact with each other, how to configure them properly, that introduces a new learning curve for sure. So what has Trend Micro been up to kind of tend to this almost perfect storm for a need for cloud security is what we call the Trend Micro Cloud One platform. And this is here to deliver a flexible, automated, and all-in-one cloud security across all those different vectors that we were just touching upon here. So we're looking at this cloud image, and we've sliced it up into all the different areas that Cloud One has a specific focus in. And you'll find as we kind of dive deeper into each of them, each piece there has something to do with those vectors or with those intersections that we just identified. So what exactly are those? Well, whenever we're looking at that same architecture diagram, or just the development pipeline in a sense, specifically with the cloud, we can go in and identify where those trend services come into play. So whenever we're looking at build automation or cloud configuration, the piece there called Cloud One Conformity is there to serve as the compliance and posture management tool. We'll assess the cloud configuration, look and see whether or not it stands well up against the best practices specific to, for instance, Azure, right? If Azure has its own well-architected framework, we'll assess the environment up against the well-architected best practices, but then also identify where we fall into our compliance standards as well, PCI DSS, GDPR, HIPAA, so on. Build automation and the infrastructure as code pipeline as well, that's something we want to be able to see, hey, is this infrastructure as code template going to run securely whenever we build it? So what we can do there with cloud conformity is actually scan the template, whether it is CloudFormation or Terraform. We're on our way towards Azure Resource Management templates as well. We're just running the same exact best practices checks that we can run on a live environment on a template, just to see how will it stand up and would it introduce any risk to our environment. The next piece there is file storage security, right? Lots of organizations are leveraging Azure Blob Storage for a number of different reasons. We saw that in Shiva's presentation. People will use it for data backup. You can use it for a application architecture. If your application requires file upload, there's a pretty hefty chance that if you're building in Azure, that file upload could land in Azure Blob. So what file storage security is here to do is to deploy protection to those Azure blobs and identify new uploads. And anytime a new file is uploaded to Azure blobs, we can then scan that for malware and then automatically paste the scan results on that object as metadata, and then automatically kick off either a quarantine or a promote workflow based off of the scan results. The next piece here is open source security, going back over to the development side of the house. If we are leveraging open source repositories for some of our source code, right, it's an elephant in the room. Not a lot of people want to talk about it, but a lot of people are definitely doing it. And with that, sometimes open source code isn't managed as well as an in-house internal code repository that we are working on, right? Some people will write stuff out there and they'll just leave it to the community to keep an eye on it. With open source security, we have an application that will ingest what projects you have in GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, other repositories as well, and identify the vulnerable libraries in those repos that you're leveraging and give you all the CVE information about that, and then also how to remediate and get things up to speed and up to date. The next piece here is container security. For container security, this is being able to apply a range of protection to Kubernetes clusters in multiple different cloud environments. Keeping it specific to Azure, if we have stuff hosted on the Azure Kubernetes service, and we want to make sure that no vulnerable containers are being deployed to that, or that there's no malicious activity being taken on or by those containers on that cluster, we can do that with container security. But we can also make sure that the registry that we are leveraging to source those containers has been scanned on a frequent basis, and that the containers that we wanted to push in the first place aren't malicious, have malware on them, keys and secrets, etc. The next piece here is Cloud One application security. With application security, we're looking at deploying RASP technology either to web applications hosted on Azure VMs or also on Azure functions as well. So if we're leveraging serverless technology or just server-based technology, we can deploy RASP technology that is going to monitor for requests coming in. Does that request have any sort of malicious attempt in there? Are they trying to run a SQL injection? Are they trying to manipulate the backend from the application? If so, let's detect it and respond to it accordingly based off of a policy set by the operations team there. And the last two here are network security and Cloud One workload security. Network security's main focus is providing intrusion detection and intrusion prevention in our Azure network. So if you're familiar with Tipping Point and its physical on-premise IDS, IPS capabilities there, getting a similar virtual IDS appliance or IPS appliance into our cloud environment to get the same job done and ultimately block the exploit of any network vulnerabilities in the cloud. The last piece here, Cloud One workload security, mainly focused on the hybrid model. So if we've got stuff sitting on premise, whether it's a physical server, a virtual server, or anything in the cloud, like an Azure VM, and we want to deploy protection out to all of those, we can drop a security agent on those servers, regardless of where they are. It'll report back to the workload security module there and help us deploy a policy that gives us a range of settings from anti-malware, host-based intrusion prevention and detection for that server in and of itself, log inspection, file integrity monitoring, and application control on that machine. So a range of different things that we're trying to cover up here. And this is all from one platform. So we log in, we have access to all these different pieces of cloud security specific to Azure. Here's just a summary page of all these different pieces there if y'all want to grab a screenshot. Also, the slides will be made available as well. So core advantages of a platform such as Cloud One, right? We're getting agentless visibility across the entire cloud. We tie in with the IAM of that particular cloud provider that we're leveraging, and that will give us visibility of your server fleet, of your storage. What Kubernetes clusters do we have? What Azure functions do we have? And have the security components been deployed to them? Next is common user and cloud account enrollment. So across the board, we want to get in there, get our team onboarded, but also get our cloud accounts onboarded so we can get that visibility. And then also common procurement and billing. So I don't like to get too much into the kind of cost conversations. That's really not my forte. I'm here to onboard people from a technical perspective. But one thing that's very good to know for all folks in the conversation today is all of this is available either on the AWS or Azure marketplace as well. So all of these solutions, you can go in and get set up, subscribe through the marketplace. But then there's also the ability to trial on the side. And it's really like an a la carte style basis, buffet style. You don't need it all. So what does the customer get when consuming Cloud One? What's going on the back end? What's feeding this? Well, Trend Micro has been a threat research firm just as much as it has been a security vendor. We've got threat research centers across the world. They're running 24/7, and we have been a market leader in vulnerability disclosure due to those research centers, but also due to the Zero-Day Initiative, which is also a Trend program. We have been identified and ranked by multiple, industry research firms as a leader in cloud security or just security in general. So that has had, a good chance to push the Trend Micro name up just a little bit. And it just goes to show that all of that research and trying to keep everybody up to speed with disclosures is going to good use. And the last piece there is, even though Cloud One has been on the market since 2019, we've had the chance to acquire a broad customer base and a lot of positive feedback as a result of that. Just to go to show that when we get onboarded with Cloud One, we have the visibility we're looking for and can deploy the protection as we need it. Now, what can y'all do today, or if not today, later today, or even tomorrow, is if you're interested, by all means, feel free to check out trendmicro.com/trial. You can get a 30-day trial of the Cloud One platform. And like I said, it's totally kind of a la carte buffet style. You don't have to play around with all these different pieces because that might be a little bit overwhelming. But you can definitely try out the one that seems to work the most for you. And there's also the potential for a always free tier. So if you're a small organization and your cloud consumption isn't too massive just yet, then there is the likelihood that your usage or consumption of Cloud One could also be free as well. So by all means, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I can put my email in the chat so you'll have it at the end. But I did want to just kind of close up here to see if there were any questions and just to keep you guys in the loop. Trend Micro Cloud One is here to bring automated, flexible, and all-in-one security specifically to Azure, but also AWS and GCP.
Oh, great.